I used to work nights back in the late 90s, clearing ice and pushing snow off the old highways that ran between small towns. It wasn't glamorous. Most nights, it wasn't even interesting. You start the truck, lower the blade, and the world narrows into this tunnel of white and steel. The cab smells like wet rubber and burned coffee. The heater rattles, and that scraping sound from the plow, it becomes the heartbeat of the night. I liked it, though. Out there, everything made sense. You did the job, and the road behind you proved it, clean, black, safe. People woke up, drove to work, never thinking about who made that happen. I didn't mind being that person, the one who worked while the world slept. It felt private, like me and the night had an understanding. That winter came early and stayed too long. I remember the way my breath fogged up the windshield, hanging there before the defroster chased it away. The ice along the edges of the glass sparkled like sugar before it melted down into thin, crooked lines. It's the kind of thing you'd normally forget by morning, but I never forgot that winter. I still see it every time the air turns sharp. There's a stretch of highway out there between two towns so small they barely make it on a map. In daylight, it's nothing special. Flat fields, thin rows of trees leaning from the wind, and a steel bridge stained with rust that looks like old tea. I'd crossed it more times than I can count. I knew every inch of it, where the plow would catch, where the wind would drift snow back onto the road, where the black ice always hid just under the surface. It was just another mile to deal with before the next. That's how those nights go. You stack the miles until morning shows up. The snow that night was the fine kind, dry and powdery, hanging in the beams like dust in a sunlit room. The road looked alive under the light, like it had grown a second skin that shifted with every gust. I lowered the blade another inch, watched the snow wrinkle and roll off to the shoulder, kept my speed steady. The heater clicked. The fan coughed. I wiped the fog off the glass with my sleeve and leaned forward to check under the bridge arch, like I always did, looking for that dull shine that meant black ice. But under the bridge looked wrong. Not danger wrong, human wrong. Like a familiar face trying to hide something. The light from the truck spilled beneath those ribs of steel but didn't bounce back the way it should have. The dark under there felt heavier, thicker, like it had weight. Sometimes snow does that. It plays tricks. Drifts look like shapes, shadows pretend to breathe. I told myself that's what I was seeing. But even as I thought it, the feeling wouldn't go away. I eased off the gas. The blade lifted just a little, and the truck glided quieter. Big machines respond to small touches. You learn that fast. The bridge waited just ahead, faint through the white. The sound of the plow changed as I got closer. The scrape stretched longer, deeper, echoing under the deck. It sounded like the road was hollow, like the sound had somewhere to go. And that's when I saw them. Not on the shoulder, not on the road. Under the bridge, shapes, 3, maybe 4 of them, standing still, dark against dark. My headlights caught their sides, soft-edged, like silhouettes carved out of thicker shadow. No faces, no movement, no color. They could have been facing the trees, or maybe they were facing me. I can't swear to it, but stillness like that, it's never empty. It's watching. I tried to reason it out. Maybe travelers getting out of the wind, maybe a broken-down car parked below. People end up in strange places at night, but the snow slid right past them and the space beneath the bridge felt crowded like sound before thunder. The thoughts I offered myself didn't stick. The dark just pushed them out. I stopped before the bridge. The engine idled rough, rumbling through the seat. The glass cleared only in the middle. The The sides stayed fogged, closing me in. My hand went to the door latch on its own, like it didn't need my permission. Then I froze. The thought of opening that door made the cab feel smaller, the air too close to breathe. Outside, the wind changed tone. It wasn't howling anymore, it was lower, like it was trying to get my attention. So I just sat there and listened. The scrape of the plow was gone, and the quiet that replaced it had weight. The ribs of the bridge groaned softly in the cold. The snow tapped against the windshield, slow, random, like someone flicking grains of sand. My breath sounded too loud, and I thought, if I turn off the engine, I'll hear something. Then another thought said, that's the last thing you want. I told myself, just cross it. Not fast, not stupid. Just do the job. I tightened my grip on the wheel and nudged the truck forward. The blade dropped until it kissed the road, bringing back that steady scrape. The tires hissed over the snow. The truck moved like a big animal that had decided not to fight me. Crossing that bridge is like driving under a low ceiling of sound. Everything you do echoes, then folds back around you. I thought, keep it smooth, keep it quiet. Don't give them a reason to look up. It's silly, I know. They'd already heard me long before that. But fear likes simple rules. It needs something to obey. For a few seconds, the world was only road, blades, snow, and that hum of steel. The figures were below now, hidden from sight, tucked under my path like a secret I had to pass over. Ahead, through the snowfall, there was the faintest glow of the far side. I fixed my eyes on it and thought, if I just make it across, I can leave this behind. Then the blade hit something, not hard, not jarring, just a clean metallic clang, sharp as a nail tapping glass. The sound didn't go forward, it went down. It traveled beneath me through the hollow below and came back up through the truck's frame. For one long second, everything vibrated with that sound. And then it stopped. It felt like dropping a coin through a grate, waiting for silence, and realizing something caught it before it hit the ground. My arms locked. The wheel didn't move, but every muscle in me did. That sound meant one thing: I wasn't alone under there. I couldn't see anyone, couldn't hear a thing. But I knew. My skin flushed hot, then cold, and the air got thick, syrupy, pressing against the windshield. Every part of me screamed to hit the gas. I didn't. Keep the line, don't slide, don't draw attention. I made myself breathe slow, in, hold, out. It didn't calm me, but it gave my fear somewhere to go. I waited for another sound. None came. Then, out of the corner of my eye, something shifted. Not fast. Slow. Like a turn. The kind of movement that says, we have time. I didn't look. My neck refused to move anyway. It wasn't that sudden kind of fear that makes you scream. It was the kind that fills you quietly until you realize it's been there all along. I held the wheel straight, eyes on the faint light ahead, and drove. When the truck rolled off the last beam, the sound changed. The echo fell away. The air loosened its hold. I was off the bridge. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just drove until the bridge shrank to nothing in the mirror. The heater rattled again. I put my hand on the dash, like I was calming something alive. Maybe I was calming myself. The rest of the shift happened. I plowed, salted, and cleared the road for people who'd never think about it. But the cab felt wrong. Heavier somehow. Like someone had been sitting beside me through that crossing and had just stepped out, leaving the warmth behind. Every few miles I checked the mirror. Every time I told myself not to, and every time I did. The night was quiet, but I didn't trust quiet anymore. It felt like a sound waiting for permission. When the sky turned pale, the kind of color that means morning's coming whether you want it or not, I rolled into the depot. The building looked smaller than I remembered. The lights were too yellow. One of the guys looked up, grinned, said, "I look like the night had wrung me out." I laughed with him the way you do when you don't want to talk. Told him the bridge needed new paint or maybe new bolts. Something harmless. I didn't tell him the truth, that the dark under that bridge had felt occupied. Nobody wants to hear that from the guy who clears the roads their kids ride to school. And I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it out loud either. Years went by and I crossed that same bridge more times than I can count. Nothing strange ever happened again. But every winter when the first real snow falls, I feel it. The quiet tightening, the same pulse in the air. Sometimes I see it in my head again. The white tunnel, the hum of the truck, and that patch of dark that refused to behave like shadow. I tell myself it was nothing, snow, light, imagination. But when I think of that metallic clang, the way it traveled down and came back up through the frame, I'm not so sure. Every year when winter returns, I remember what it felt like to cross a bridge knowing something underneath was listening and choosing not to look up.
You ever feel like your truck's trying to tell you something? Not with alarms or warning lights, just a kind of presence you can feel. That night, I was hauling north. The highway was clean and snow whispered across the windshield. Nothing wrong, nothing off. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling the truck felt heavier than it should, like it was tired. I've driven this route 50 times. Every bump, every sound, I know them. But the hum under the seat felt deeper, slower, almost like it was breathing with me. I turned the radio off to listen, thinking maybe it was the tires. Silence filled the cab. Then one dull knock came from the trailer wall. Not loud, not threatening, just there. You tell yourself, it's the load shifting, always something logical. But the longer I drove, the more I caught myself checking the mirrors, not for cars, but for movement I couldn't name. Past the border lights, it got emptier. No stations open, no voices on the radio, just me and the hum of diesel. After a few hours, the line between sound and thought starts to blur. You begin hearing your own breathing through the fan. I kept glancing at the clock, same minute every time, 1:42. I thought it was frozen, but the miles kept changing. The highway signs looked wrong too, not unfamiliar, just off, like someone had rotated them when no one was watching. You start talking to yourself out here. That's what I did. Said out loud, "Truck's fine. Keep driving." The wheel buzzed a little, almost like it agreed. When the road's that quiet, even a lie can sound like proof. At the next rest turnout, I pulled in. Not because I was scared, just needed a minute to breathe. The air bit my lungs, sharp winter cold that makes every sound echo. I walked around with a flashlight. Nothing unusual, tires fine, straps tight. Except for a dust line on the back door, fresh, like something brushed against it. No footprints in the snow though, none at all. I pressed my glove against it. 5 faint smudges, not claws, not scratches, just pressure. I told myself it could have been a branch, wind, static buildup. But the shape looked deliberate. I climbed back in, shut the door, and the cab's air felt warmer, too warm, like someone else's breath had filled it while I was gone. Once you're rolling again, your brain wants comfort. It tries to file things away as handled. That's what I did. Turned the radio on, found the weather report, let the noise wash the thoughts out. But every few miles, the truck groaned, a low drag from the rear axles. I checked the mirrors, still nothing. You know that thin hum a diesel makes when it's idling just right? It started syncing with my heartbeat. That's when I realized it wasn't fear keeping me awake, it was attention. That kind of focus you get when you know something's there but can't justify stopping to prove it. And once that thought takes root, the miles start feeling endless. About an hour later, snow started again. Thick, slow flakes, big enough to look alive under the headlights. The road narrowed. Through the glass, I saw shapes that weren't quite reflections, soft, human-height shadows gliding past the cab and fading when I blinked. Could have been snow, could have been fatigue. I turned the high beams off, and that's when the knocking came back. 3 dull hits from the rear. Even now, I remember how casual they sounded, like someone reminding me they were still there. I didn't check this time. I just kept driving. You can't unhear something that wants to be noticed. By dawn, everything looked normal again. Truck ran fine. No marks, no noise. But the dashboard clock was 10 minutes ahead of my phone, and it shouldn't have been. The logbook showed a stop I didn't take, 30 miles back. The handwriting looked like mine, same sloppy 7. I gripped the wheel so hard my palms hurt. I thought about calling dispatch, but what do you even say? Hey, I think my truck's alive. So I didn't. I just drove home, unloaded, and parked. Normal day. Almost. Next morning, I walked out to start her up. The frost was thick, sunlight making it glow pale blue. I brushed the windshield clear and stopped halfway. There, on the inside of the glass, were 5 clear handprints. Same pattern as before. Too big for mine, too shallow to be real. I stared until my breath fogged them over. Then I turned the key. Engine started fine, smooth, like nothing had happened. But when I backed out of the driveway, the radio whispered a word, quiet, stretched. Could have been static, could have been my name. I still drive nights, same route. Everything works, no noises, no marks. But every now and then, I hear a soft breath over the hum, like someone steadying themselves right before a curve. I tell myself it's the heat event. I tell myself lots of things, but sometimes, when I hit mile 143, the steering wheel hums again, that same slow rhythm. And I swear the truck exhales. I keep my eyes on the road, because I've learned one thing out here. Not everything that rides with you wants to be seen. You know, that wasn't the only time something like that happened. I've got another story. Same kind of night. Same kind of road. But this one, it wasn't the truck that fell off. It was the highway itself. I've been running the same route for years. Fargo through the border. 287 miles of quiet road. Same turns, same diners, same silence. When you drive that long, the road becomes part of your mind. You don't even look at the signs anymore. You just feel them. There's comfort in that kind of rhythm. Out here, time stops being hours. It turns into fuel and miles. That night, everything looked normal. The sky was clear. The road was dry. Diesel steady, until it wasn't. Around mile 187, my headlights caught the next green marker. 188. I expected it. But when I glanced down, the odometer said I'd only gone half a mile since the last one. A small thing, sure. But numbers don't lie out here. They keep you honest when the world's asleep. So when the road gave me an extra half mile that didn't belong, I slowed down, not scared, just curious. Like hearing your name in a room you thought was empty. The GPS blinked. My location hovered between coordinates. No signal loss, just hesitation. like it couldn't decide where I was. I tapped the screen and it jumped forward, showing mile 188.9. That number shouldn't exist. The map only shows even miles. I laughed, one of those tired road laughs you do to keep your heart calm. It didn't help much. The hum under the seat felt heavier. I checked the mirrors. Nothing behind, nothing ahead. Just my own lights bouncing off snow. Probably a maintenance error, I told myself. But when I crested the next hill, I saw light. A soft orange glow bleeding through fog. Gas station lights. Thing is, there's no station between 187 and 189. But it was there, clear as day, sitting alone like it had been waiting. I pulled in, mostly out of habit. One pump, one office. Sign said 71 fuel. Everything looked new. Black pavement, glowing coffee machine, like it had opened yesterday. I stepped out. The air was sharp enough to sting my lungs. No wind, no sound. I filled the tank. Screen worked fine. Total came to 87.49. Inside, a young guy stood behind the counter, head down, like he'd been waiting for me. I handed him my card. He nodded once, ran it through, printed the receipt. "Stay on 71, he said. Not creepy, just certain. Like a man repeating something he'd already said too many times. I nodded, said thanks, grabbed the slip, and left. Back on the highway, headlights sliced the fog until it opened up again. Next marker read 189, back to normal. I told myself I was overtired, but I glanced at the receipt before tossing it in the glove box. The address read Route 71, mile 188A. There's no 188A anywhere on that road. Next week, same run, same time, same weather. Didn't think about it until I hit mile 187. Then I slowed, half expecting to see that glow again. Nothing, just darkness. The road looked like it had never hosted light. Still, I drove with my eyes flicking between the odometer and the signs. 187, 188, 189. No gap, no fog, just the clean rhythm of the drive. When I stopped later for coffee, I opened the glove box for napkins. That crumpled receipt slid out. I flattened it. Same price, same timestamp. But the paper looked old. The ink had faded like it had sat in sunlight for years. I checked my bank app. No charge for 87.49. No record at all. Not even pending. I laughed softly and tossed it back, but my stomach didn't laugh with me. Receipts don't fade in a week, and gas stations don't vanish overnight. Next day, I mentioned it to dispatch. Just casual talk, while signing off logs. They looked at me funny when I said 188A. Checked maps and permits. Nothing. Closest stop was 23 miles back. That was that. A buddy overheard and laughed. Said maybe I stopped at a ghost truck stop. I laughed too, but it came out thin. That night I couldn't sleep. Kept picturing that orange glow, the silence, the way the clerk spoke. Stay on 71. It didn't sound spooky then, just certain. Like he knew something about me that I didn't. A week later, I decided to check again. Left earlier this time. Snow came down soft, fat flakes drifting sideways in my beams. Somewhere around 186, I turned off the radio. Didn't want noise mixing with thought. When the next marker passed, I counted slow in my head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. 10 minutes later, 187. I waited for the glow. Nothing. Then, for a second, the GPS froze. A small blue dot flashed on the map. 71 fuel closed, then vanished. My chest tightened. I drove another 10 miles before breathing normal again. Everything else worked fine, like the road had swallowed that glitch and moved on. Back at the yard, I couldn't let it go. I searched online, checked old maps. No 71 fuel anywhere. But a highway report from 1990 showed a way station right where I'd seen that light, shut down after a fire. I showed the map to an old-timer who'd been around forever. He nodded slow. "Yeah," he said. "Burned clean. They never rebuilt. Nothing left but concrete." I told him I'd fueled there 2 weeks ago. He just stared, finished his coffee, and walked off. The silence after that was heavier than the road itself. A month later, I ran that route again. I'd almost convinced myself it never happened. Then, near 187, fog rolled in thick. I slowed, hands tight on the wheel. For half a second, the horizon flickered. Faint orange light where the station used to be. I blinked, and it was gone. Fog cleared like it had never been there. But when I reached the border, the clock on my dash read 3:12 a.m. My logbook jumped from 3 o'clock straight to 3:12. No record of those missing minutes. Same gap that showed on the old receipt. I don't tell people about it now, not because I'm scared, because nobody listens when the world misplaces something small. I keep the receipt though, still in the glove box, stiff and pale. The address still clear enough to read. Route 71, mile 188A. Every now and then, I run my thumb across the paper, and it leaves a dry dust, like chalk. That's how I know it's still changing. Sometimes, when the fog is low and the air too quiet, I check my GPS as I pass that stretch. It always hesitates for a second, then catches up, like it's deciding which version of the road I'm on. I still drive that route, same truck, same nights. Everything looks fine, but every once in a while, when I pass 187 and the hum under the seat shifts slightly, I remember that clerk's voice. I can still hear him saying it. "Stay on 71. It sounds different now, less like advice, more like a warning. I keep my hands steady, eyes forward, truck rolling. Because I've learned something about the road. Not every mile you drive belongs to the map. Some belong to something else. And if I ever see that station again, I'll stop, just for a moment. But this time, I won't pay cash. Nights at that little gas stop off Route 19 had their own kind of rhythm. The hum of the lights, the slow breath of the wind rolling off the fields. Everything seemed to move at its own quiet pace. After a while, you start syncing with it, like the whole world is exhaling and you just follow along. Inside, life stayed small. The cooler would rattle, the shelves would creak, and sometimes the floorboards sighed under my boots. It wasn't lonely exactly, more like peaceful in a way that made time stop mattering. You stop counting hours when the world stops changing. Some nights, I'd stand behind the counter, staring out at the road stretching into black. It looked endless, but also empty, like a thought that never finished. I'd grown used to that emptiness. It kept me steady somehow. There was something honest about a place that didn't pretend to be more than it was. But that kind of stillness notices everything. And one night, it noticed her before I did. I remember thinking the air felt different, like someone had walked into the silence and left a heartbeat behind. She came from the dark like a slow thought forming, step by step, calm, careful, almost like she was asking permission from the night. That green sweater she wore looked handmade, thick and warm, like something that belonged to another time. Her boots carried the dry dirt of the fields, and when she stepped inside, the smell of earth followed her in. She never said much, just a nod, a faint smile, a quiet thank you when I poured her coffee. She always paid in cash, always exact change. Then she'd slip back out into the dark without a word wasted. There was nothing strange about her, no movie moment, no chill in the air. She was just steady, predictable in a way that made the night feel alive again. After a while, I could sense her coming before I saw her. The road seemed to lean toward the station when she was near. I didn't know what drew me to that small routine. Maybe it was the comfort of being known, even if just for a second. Her quiet felt familiar, like two people sharing the same kind of loneliness. It was never about her words. It was about the silence that followed her and how peaceful that silence felt. Before long, I started preparing for her without thinking about it. A cup ready on a napkin, the gum placed by the register. The smallest acts became part of my shift, like a conversation we never needed to start. If you'd asked me then, I'd have said it was habit. But there was something deep under it. Some nights the sound of her boots on the gravel gave me more comfort than the paycheck. That quiet connection, whatever it was, made the night softer, more human. She always looked the same, calm, grounded, eyes a little tired but kind. There was never any rush, never any awkwardness. She'd nod, I'd pour, she'd leave. Simple as that. But the simplicity had weight. You don't realize you're depending on a moment until it doesn't come. Her visit started to feel like proof that the world still had small kindness in it. Like we were both holding something fragile together, even if we didn't know what. Sometimes I still wonder what I was really waiting for, the person or the feeling she brought with her. Then came the night that broke the rhythm. The sheriff stopped by, the way people do when they're avoiding sleep. He leaned against the counter, made small talk, and let the silence fill in the blanks. He mentioned the stretch of road, how the farms had been empty for years now. Said no one really walked these fields anymore. That stuck with me, because I'd seen her walk that road every few nights, steady as sunrise. And I realized then, I didn't actually know where she came from. While he talked, my eyes wandered toward the window, just by instinct. And there she was, green sweater, hands in her pockets, watching from the edge of the lot. When she saw him standing there beside me, she stopped. Didn't run, didn't flinch, just stood there for a breath too long, then turned back toward the field. No sound, no hurry. Just that slow fade into darkness until even the shape of her was gone. The sheriff caught the way I looked and asked, "Something out there?" And I said, "No, nothing." But I knew that wasn't true. Something in that moment felt wrong, not in a scary way, but in a way that left a mark, like I'd just let something pass that wasn't meant to. After that night, she didn't come back. The world went back to quiet, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. It was heavier now, like it knew what was missing. I kept catching myself pouring coffee I didn't need, setting out gum like a habit with no purpose. I'd stare out the window, waiting without admitting that's what I was doing. Sometimes I thought I saw movement in the dark, but it was just the wind teasing old grass along the road. I told myself stories. Maybe she'd moved on. Maybe she found a new route, a new place to stop. But every reason I gave myself sounded like a lie told kindly. The truth was simpler. The nights just felt emptier without her. There's something strange about losing something you never really had. You can't mourn it, not properly. But it leaves this hollow space where something human used to sit. And every time the door stayed shut, I felt it a little more. I didn't know what I was waiting for anymore. But I knew the quiet had changed. It had learned her shape, and it wasn't ready to forget. Then, one night, the world folded back on itself. A thin fog rolled in from the fields, the kind that blurs light and sound until everything feels half awake. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I remember standing by the window, watching the glow of the canopy soften in the haze. The road was barely visible, and then she was just there, like the night had drawn her out. Green sweater, still as ever, standing by pump 4, half in shadow, half in the light. There wasn't fear, just an ache of recognition, like seeing something you'd stopped believing in. My chest felt tight, not from dread, but from something close to relief. I stepped outside before my thoughts could catch up. The air was colder than usual, the kind that stings a little when you breathe too deep. I called out softly, not her name, just the sound you make when you want someone to know they're seen. She didn't move, didn't turn, but the fog seemed to bend around her, like the air itself was trying to keep her from fading again. And in that stillness, I swear it felt like she wanted to tell me something. I walked toward her, slow enough not to break whatever held us there. Each step on the gravel sounded too loud, too alive. When she finally turned, our eyes met, steady, quiet, almost apologetic. She looked older somehow, or maybe it was just the fog softening everything. Her expression wasn't sad, exactly. It was the kind of look you give someone when you know something they don't, something they're not ready to understand. I told her I'd kept her coffee warm. It sounded foolish, but it was all that came to me. For a moment, her mouth curved, not quite a smile, more like memory stirring. The canopy light swayed and the pump hose moved with it, creaking softly. It felt like time had decided to rest between us, like the whole world wanted to stay still long enough to hear her speak. But she didn't. She just watched me with that patient kind of sadness, and I felt the urge to say more, to ask, to reach, to bridge the space between us. I looked back just once toward the station, maybe to steady myself, maybe to breathe. And when I turned again, she was gone. No steps, no rustle, no motion. Only the faint swing of the hose and the fog drifting where she'd stood. I waited, listening, because sometimes the earth remembers what people don't. But the night stayed empty. No footprints, no sound of grass moving, nothing but stillness. The only thing left was the smell, a faint trace of coffee in the air, warm where the world was cold. I didn't feel fear, not even surprise. Just a deep, steady understanding that whatever had visited that place had gone back where it belonged. I stood there until the fog began to thin, until the lights over the pumps found their sharp edges again. Then I went inside, finished the shift the way you hum through a song you only half remember. Slow, quiet, letting the silence carry the missing parts. The nights went on after that. Customers came and went. The road stayed long, the lights stayed humming, but the stillness had changed its shape. Every now and then, I still looked toward that edge of the field, not to check, just to remember, because I can't explain what I saw, and I've stopped trying to. But I know something was there, something gentle, something lonely, something that didn't belong to this world anymore, yet somehow still does. And maybe that's all it was ever asking of me. Not to understand, just not to forget. I used to rent that cabin every year. Same week, same road that curled into the trees until it forgot where it was going. The key always sat under the chipped blue rock by the bottom step, waiting like it never moved. That part never changed. I liked the ritual of it. Unlocking the door, feeling the stale air roll out, setting my bag down in the same corner. It wasn't about getting away from anything dramatic. It was more about returning to something that didn't ask questions. I'd split a little wood, make coffee that tasted faintly like smoke, and listen to the wind moving through the trees. There was comfort in how little it demanded of me. The cabin didn't care what I'd been doing all year. It just waited, patient, smelling faintly of ash and pine. I remember thinking that maybe places could recognize people in their own quiet way. It gave me a sense of being known, even if by something without eyes. Funny how certain routines can feel like protection. I didn't realize then how much that sameness depended on nothing ever changing, how fragile that peace really was. The place had its own small language. The front door needed a little lift before it would open. One of the porch planks had a knot that looked like a closed eyelid. Inside, everything leaned slightly. The lamp, the table, even the floor. I'd gotten used to that tilt. It made the place feel human. The first breath always carried that mix you don't forget. Smoke caught in the walls, a trace of damp wool, and that sharp sweetness of cut wood still bleeding sap. I went through my usual motions without thinking. Struck a match, fed the stove, unpacked. I even found myself tracing that old burn mark on the armrest, the one someone left long before me. It's strange how your hands remember a place before your head does. The cabin came alive in little sighs and ticks as the fire took. Everything seemed fine, perfectly fine. Maybe a bit quieter than usual, but I told myself that was just the cold. It's what I always said when something small felt wrong, that it was only the cold. That afternoon, I went out back to split firewood. The cold hit different that year. Not sharper exactly, but heavier, as if it had weight. When the axe struck, the sound didn't echo like it used to. It just disappeared into the trees. I looked around and noticed how still everything was. No birds, no prints near the porch. Even the wind seemed to lose interest halfway through the clearing. Normally, that kind of quiet made me feel peaceful. But this time, it sat wrong. It wasn't the kind of silence you rest in. It was the kind that listens back. I told myself it was just early in the season. Maybe the wildlife hadn't come down yet. Still, I kept glancing toward the tree line, waiting for movement. There was nothing. Not a flicker of color or sound. Just me, and the breath that hung in front of my face, drifting away like it didn't want to stay near me. I remember that. How even the air seemed to keep its distance. The first night passed without trouble, though I woke a few times thinking I'd heard something small. A step, a board easing under weight, maybe the stove popping as it cooled. I kept telling myself I'd just forgotten how loud silence can be when you haven't earned it yet. Morning light came thin and watery, the kind that doesn't warm anything. I sat by the stove with coffee, and I felt the cabin stretch and yawn back into shape. The smell of old smoke felt familiar again, like a coat I hadn't worn in a while. The second night was quieter still. The fire hissed in the stove like it was whispering to itself. I read for a while, then lay there listening to the kind of stillness that tricks your brain into inventing small sounds. I even laughed a little at myself. How the mind fills gaps with ghosts when it's bored. That's what I thought it was. Just imagination trying to keep me company. It's strange what you convince yourself of, right before the world decides to correct you. The third night came colder. The air in the cabin felt heavier, damp with the kind of chill that seeps in from the ground. I remember pulling the blanket up to my chin and feeling an odd kind of peace. the kind that comes right before something interrupts it. What woke me wasn't a sound. It was the absence of movement, my own. My body simply refused to cooperate. I was awake, fully, and I couldn't breathe. There was weight on me, not like a branch or another body, but something focused, intelligent. It pressed in slow, deliberate pulses, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat, as if studying it. The first flash of panic wasn't thought. It was instinct, ancient and blind. I tried to move my arm, but it felt pinned by air itself. Sweat ran cold along my spine. My heart hammered uselessly against the thing that wouldn't let go. Then, without warning, the pressure lifted, not gradually, but all at once. Like something had finished its examination and stepped aside. I lay there gasping, half waiting for it to return. The cabin had gone perfectly still, as though even the wood was holding its breath. Then came the breathing, not mine. It came from just beyond the wall, low and even, each inhale deliberate, the kind of breathing that belongs to someone listening closely. The sound was close enough that I could feel its rhythm syncing with my pulse. My body knew before my mind did that it wasn't an animal. It was too steady, too patient. I remember thinking that if I moved, I might confirm something I didn't want to know. So I stayed there, eyes open in the dark, counting. One breath, then another, until I couldn't tell if the counting was happening in my head or outside it. The breathing never quickened, never stumbled. It just stayed, slow and unbothered. Time stretched thin. I waited for a footstep, a scrape of boot on wood, anything that would give it shape. Nothing came. Only that breathing, like it was matching mine on purpose. When it stopped, the silence that followed was worse. It felt like the air forgot how to move. I don't know how long I stayed awake after that, staring at the faint red eye of the stove, afraid to blink in case the darkness decided to look back. Morning crept in as if unsure it should. Light pooled slowly along the floorboards. My chest ached from the way I'd been breathing. Shallow, cautious. The room looked exactly the same, which somehow made it worse. The fire had gone out, but the air still carried warmth, like someone had only just stepped away. I opened the door expecting something. Anything. But the frost on the porch was smooth, perfect, no marks. The snow line beyond the yard looked untouched, blank as a clean sheet. That emptiness stung worse than finding evidence would have. I walked around the cabin once, boots crunching too loud in the stillness. I wanted a reason. Maybe an animal's tracks, maybe some harmless logic to plug the hole in my head. But there was nothing. Inside I moved like someone else had written my body's instructions, packed what I could reach, left the rest. I set the kettle on the stove out of habit, then turned it off before it boiled. I couldn't stand the sound of steam. The cabin looked the same as when I'd arrived, but it no longer felt like it was mine to touch. I slid the key back under the blue rock without looking down. I didn't need to. My hand already knew the shape of it by heart. The road home felt longer, though I'd driven it enough times to know every bend. The trees leaned over the hood like they were closing ranks behind me. I didn't glance in the mirror much. I didn't want to see what the woods might remember. Halfway down the valley, the air softened. I caught the smell of chimney smoke from a farmhouse and felt something loosen in my chest. I told myself it had been a dream, a trick of fatigue, some kind of paralysis I'd read about once. But saying it didn't make it true. It just made it bearable. When I got home, I put everything from the trip away faster than usual. Washed clothes, folded the blanket, emptied the bag. I did it like I was erasing evidence, though I couldn't have said of what. I haven't gone back since. People ask if I miss it. The quiet, the woods, the solitude. I tell them I do, and I mean it. But what I don't say is that I still wake sometimes with the same shallow breath I had that night. I listen for the world to be still again, waiting for that slow, patient rhythm to answer me through the dark. I know how it sounds. I know I can't prove a thing. But I felt it, and I still wonder, after all this time, if whatever was out there that night felt me too. I still think of that weekend as if it's nearby in time, though it lives a long way back. Late October carried that clean, metallic smell, the kind that says the year is closing its hand. Work had been stacked high for weeks. Voices, fluorescent light, the feeling I hadn't finished a thought in months. I wanted a small spell of quiet before the cold pushed everything indoors. No grand plan, just a lake I used to visit, an old tent, and the comfort of doing something simple, the way I used to do it. I packed without fuss. Stove, beans, a paperback with a cracked spine, that faded sleeping bag that always smells faintly of cedar. It felt good to know where each thing belonged. I told myself I'd only be gone a couple of days. Back before anyone noticed I'd stepped out of rhythm. What I wanted most wasn't scenery. It was that stillness, where a person can hear their own thoughts arrive and settle. Nothing dramatic. A quiet weekend, where nothing happened. That's what I told myself as I shut the trunk, while the leaves skittered by like they were in a hurry to be done. The road there is mostly empty past the last town. 2 lanes bending through low hills and tired fields. The sun hung a little lower than I'd planned, but I wasn't worried. I recognized everything, and yet not quite. An old gas station painted a new color, a sign missing a letter, a fence line sagging where it used to stand sharp. The lake came into view as the light thinned. It always looks larger when the air is cold, like it pulls the distance closer. I parked beneath a stand of birches and took my time, because that's why I'd come. The tent went up the way it always does, when your hands remember for you. A small fire. Nothing to attract attention, just enough for warmth and a place to stare into. Beans in the pan, nets in the water, with the easy faith they'd have a gift for me by morning. I read until the print softened and drifted. The fire sank into a pulse. There was a stillness I thought I wanted, deep and complete, as if the night had pressed its ear to me, listening for proof I was there. After the fire sank to a reddish blink, the world took on that flat quiet you don't get in town. No engines, no doors, just small living things. Water turning itself over, a leaf finding ground, the tent fabric sighing as the air cooled. I lay on my back and let the quiet fill every crowded place inside me. It felt almost medicinal. I could smell the lake, dark and iron-tinted, and the faint, sour trace of smoke caught in my clothes. My body ached in that honest way that comes from a day you decided for yourself. I told myself this was the point, to be a man, in a place that doesn't need anything from you. The cold crept in like a thoughtful hand, and I tucked the bag tighter around my shoulders. I remember the page I'd been on, the shape of the paragraph more than the words. I must have drifted somewhere between one breath and the next, because I don't remember choosing to sleep. Only that the tense white ceiling had settled into a soft grey that felt kind, and the sounds of the lake had moved farther away. I woke without a reason I can name. Not a bang, not a cry. The night had changed texture. The fire was a low, dark mound, and my eyes did that slow adjustment when you don't want to admit you're awake yet. That's when I heard it. Movement, just beyond the tree line. Not rushing through, not animal quick. A measured back and forth, the way you walk when you're thinking more than traveling. Pacing. It had that deliberate rhythm that makes you lean toward it. My first thought was ordinary. Maybe someone had come in late to use the water's edge, or a ranger making rounds. My voice surprised me. It came out, and I couldn't pull it back. I called a simple hello, the kind meant to keep things normal. The steps stopped right away. The night became exact. Every small sound seemed to excuse itself and step aside. I sat there, lips clamped around a breath I hadn't finished taking. Nothing answered. I told myself. It could be a deer freezing after hearing me. I told myself a lot of things, the useful kind that let a person lie back down. I didn't move, and the quiet pressed a little harder. It's strange how fear settles. First sharp, then dull, then patient. I lay listening to the kind of silence that has weight. The cold came up through the ground, and I pulled my knees in like that would stop it. Every small sound from the trees felt intentional, as if each creak had purpose, as if the night itself were trying not to disturb something else that might be listening too. I thought about the distance to help and realized I couldn't measure it in minutes. That thought sits in your chest differently. I kept my hand near the zipper, not touching it, because the sound it would make felt like a choice I couldn't take back. I told myself again, it was an animal, that the woods are full of harmless movement, that only feels personal in the dark. The rational part of me kept whispering, and I let it, because I needed its voice. Eventually, my breathing slowed, and the shape of the tent returned to being just fabric and poles. The world didn't move or if it did, I couldn't hear it. That quiet began to feel less like a threat and more like something waiting its turn. Light came a little late, or maybe it only felt that way, because I'd been measuring nothing by itself for so long. The first color that returned to the world was that faint smoke brown after embers, and then the lake put a pale stripe through the trees. I unzipped the tent, the way you do when you're trying not to disturb a thought. The air outside tasted like metal and wet leaves. Coffee first, routine first, because normal steps are handrails. I turned to stir the ashes, and that's when I saw them. Impressions where there shouldn't have been any. Bare feet, not tiny, not grown. That in-between size you don't quite know how to name until you say teenager. And even then, you're only guessing. The prints were neat, each one placed as if the ground had been considered before it was used. They skirted the fire's edge and made a loose ring around the tent, close enough that whoever made them could have reached out and pressed a hand against the fabric where my shoulder had been. I stood very still. I looked for the line that would carry them away, but they didn't choose a direction. They were only here. And then they were not. I've tried explaining to myself how prints can exist without a path, and I never arrive anywhere good. I walked the perimeter like a slow clock, reading the ground. The little messages leaves and soil leave each other. Nothing else marked the earth. No heel picked up grit and set it down again. No toe pushed off into the next step. I crouched and touched one of the impressions with 2 fingers. The dirt was cool, faintly damp, holding the shape like a memory it hadn't decided to release yet. I thought of possibilities and rejected them one by one, not because they were impossible, but because they didn't fit that carefulness. A prank would have left laughter somewhere. A lost kid would have called out or headed for water or light. A ranger would have worn boots. I thought about the sound from the dark, that even pacing, the way it paused exactly when I spoke, and noticed my hands had gone quiet and steady, the way they do when your mind knows something it won't say out loud. I kept searching, but the ground kept offering me only my own boot prints and that thin ring of bare feet. The lake looked ordinary. The trees didn't care. I packed with a strange politeness, folding the tent as if not to wake something. Didn't check the nets. The water sounded the way it always does when it brushes the shore, like a voice you can almost understand. The drive back felt longer, even though the road hadn't changed. I remember passing the same fence line, seeing the same sag, and paying attention like it mattered. Town returned with its ordinary noises and little errands. People talked about weather and recipes and a game I hadn't watched. I nodded in the right places, and no one could tell that part of me was still by a low fire, looking at the ground. With time, the sharpness of that morning wore down, the way a cut becomes a line you can't quite find unless you're looking. But at night, there's always that seam of wakefulness, where my ears go back to that patient quiet, and I wait for a sound I hope not to hear, and yet listen for anyway. I ask myself whether it matters that I never knew who was out there, or what they wanted. I tell myself it doesn't, and then the room goes still, and I still wonder.